This very large machine is called the panel saw. The panel saw is really nice because it is meant to cut very large, heavy panels. On a table saw, if we were trying to cut a big 4-foot by 8-foot sheet, I'd have to pick it up, lay it on the table, and push it across the blade. This is meant so that I can put the panel on the saw, keep it stationary, and then I move the blade across the board. That way I don't have to keep a hold of it and keep it lifted off the floor. Now, some of the things that I want to point out, some of the parts on the panel saw are here so you can understand. First, here's our stop. This is the stop right here. It slides left and right. It has a tape measure on here. Now, this stop has two different orange stop markers, if you will. You always want to use the one that is closer to the blade. Now, the stop could go on the other side of the blade, though we generally only use it on the left side of the blade. So I'm going to use the orange marker to the right. It's the one closest to the blade. So when I want to set a mark, I set it where I want my measurement to be, and then I pull down the front part, lock it in. Now it doesn't move. Now, as we're cutting boards, if I move my board down into the stop and then cut, and I need to cut multiples, I'll shift it down and against the stop again. If I hit the stop too hard, it will move. It's not locked in that tightly. So every time you hit it hard, the stop is going to move down anywhere from a 32nd to over a 1/16 of an inch. You do that a couple of times and the boards you're cutting are now going to be way off. They're going to be larger than what you want, and then you got to recut. So make sure you're gentle with the stop. You don't slam into it really hard. Here, of course, is the saw blade, and it's on a lever that can retract the blade. So when I'm ready to cut, I'm going to push it all the way in. Now, I don't have to keep pressure on that blade to keep it in. It'll stay there, and then I grab and pull down as I'm cutting, and I'll slice right through the board. When I'm done, pull it all the way out, and then lift it back up again to get it out of the way. Whenever you're vertical cutting, it's always from the top to the bottom. Cut from top down. We have on the very bottom the ledge where large panels are going to sit. If I have a big panel, we want it down on this black ledge. Now, if we have a smaller panel and I don't want to be bent over while I'm using this saw, then we're going to use the auxiliary fence or the pull-out fence. Now, here's how you do it. If I grab this and just pull, it doesn't want to pull out, doesn't want to sit flat. You've got to grab, shift left, and then lift up. Grab these, left, lift, and go back right, and it kind of locks it in, and now I can put my board on top of that. This is simply here so that I'm not bent over using the saw. I can now use it here in front of my body so I can hold the board as I'm cutting, which we'll demonstrate in a minute. To get it out of the way, again, go left, down, and it's out of the way. Other parts on this machine. The machine can cut horizontally as well, but this gantry needs to be able to move left and right, so I need to unlock it from the backing. So there's a lever on the right side. I'm holding it right here. Lift, and you can hear it unlock, and now I can move the entire gantry left and right. So there to there. Now, the saw blade itself is still vertical, so how do you turn that? There's no latch on this model. This is a Holzer. Some models do have a latch where you got to pull it back or flip something. This one, I just take the motor and push, and there it is. Now, this is in anyway. I can't change it. This has to be fully retracted, but it's left, right, whatever you want to call it, vertical, horizontal, and now it locks itself into position. Now that it's locked in position, the only other thing we need to do is lock the blade so it can't go up and down. Otherwise, when I'm cutting horizontally, it's going to be able to float and go up and down, and you don't get a square cut. So that lock is right here on this side. Once I push that down, the blade cannot lift and go down. Now it'll stay straight as I'm pushing it left and right. So it's a very versatile saw that can cut both vertically and horizontally. The on-off switch is located to the right of the blade. So if I lower this all the way down, it's right here, on-off, emergency stop. And remember, if you do press the emergency stop, it doesn't pop back out. So you've got to twist pops out, and then you can turn it back on again. Now let's talk about technique on how to use the machine to cut. First of all, figure out where your measurement's going to be. So if I measure this down to 26, I can lock it down. Remember, I'm using the arrow on the right side towards the blade. Take my board, slide it down gently to the stop, and it's nice and straight and tight. Now, this is called the frame, the back frame, if you will. These plastic strips are the frame, and the best side of your board should be against the frame. You're going to get a little better side on this side, the back, than you will on the front. If your saw is well tuned, it should be negligible, but generally speaking, the back side gives you a better cut. When you're ready to cut, move the machine down, and instead of pushing it in up above and sliding onto it, I tend to put this cover, this frame, an inch or two below the top edge so that it doesn't bang into the edge and maybe do a little bit of damage. Now, it is on a spring, of course, but put it right there, an inch or two below the top edge, and then push it in. What happens sometimes are students go a little bit too low, and you get what's called a plunge cut. Now the blade is actually cutting where the wood is, and I'm not moving. I'm plunging the blade in, and it's starting to cut. Up here, the blade is still in this area, and you're not cutting your board. Then I'll ease down into it. Something else you want to make sure of is to keep one hand on your board. The smaller the board is, the more I need to brace it while I'm cutting. For example, you can see where these frames are located. If I press right here at the top really hard and push, it's going to lever the bottom out and the board is going to fall. So if I push, and I'll demonstrate this, it's going to push and hit the floor. Now that pressure is also going to happen when this cover hits the top. I don't want it to lever out. It's going to hit my feet. So keep your hand, push that down to the stop, tight against the board while I'm cutting. Even this is better than nothing. That way I can keep some pressure down and keep it tight. So turn it on, put the cover about right here, hold it, push, and then go down. Pull it all the way out, and then go back up. So the motions are in, down, out, up. You never want to lift the blade in there. If you lift the blade back up, it's going to skim the edge and chew or tear out some of this, your nice corner that you just cut. Then take your piece and just throw it away in the trash that's found on the side of the machine. Small pieces like this, I would cut on the table saw, but if you are, for whatever reason, must cut it on the panel saw, it's going to be very difficult. It doesn't quite reach the top frame here, one little push here and it's going to flop out. Something like this, I've got to press right where the frame is located so that I can hold it in place while I'm cutting. But generally speaking, smaller boards that you can easily handle, cut on the table saw. Now that we've cut vertically, now let's talk a little bit about cutting horizontally. Whenever you cut horizontally, it's always from the left to the right, so always cut going to the right. Now this particular model won't really allow me to cut to the left. There's a splitter on one side of the blade that won't even allow me to cut that way anyway, but it's always from the left to the right. Again, to set up for cutting horizontally, just take the saw and push, and the blade just turns. Depending on your model, do whatever needs to be done. Figure out where your measurement is. In my case, I'm going to set it up to just skim the top of this board and set it up, and then lock it in place. And last, lift the locking lever, and now I can move the saw to the side. We're going to use the same technique that we use for cutting vertically. Bring it all the way over so we're not plunge cutting, and then we're going to walk the entire saw across the board. Turn it on, in, all the way across, then pull it back out. Now in this case, as you can see, I'm only trimming the top edge to clean it up. whether you're doing that or not. But my point is, there's a little piece of wood on top of the blade. When I come out the other side, that little piece of wood gets cut off and then rests on the moving blade as I'm exiting out the other side. Now, a little piece like this isn't going to do a whole lot of damage or not going to have any problems. But if I'm cutting this very large, very heavy piece of melamine in half, those two boards are going to collapse on the blade. So what do?
Begin cutting your board as usual, but before you get to the end, you need to lift the top piece so it doesn't drop and pinch the blade.
When you've completed all of your cuts, most of the time it'll probably already be in the middle. Just leave it there. Make sure the machine has stopped before you walk away. So it needs to come to a complete stop, which only takes a few seconds, and then walk away. So if you've done a horizontal cut, bring it back to this position. Now what I'm doing is I'm seeing there's an orange tab at the top where I'm lining up two orange tabs. That lets me know that it's in the right place. Up above, there are pins, metal pins that allow me to lock this into place so I can cut vertically again in a straight line. On this particular model, the machine, if I have it set to cut vertically, won't turn on unless it's locked. So I'm pressing the on button, it's cutting vertically, but it knows it's not locked on a pin, so it can move left and right. So I've got to lock it down. When you lock it down, if you only pull really lightly and don't really give it a good shove, it probably won't turn on. So if you've pulled the bar down to lock it and it's not turning on, the most likely cause is that you didn't pull hard enough. Just go back to the lever, give it a good yank, and then try it out. Now we pull down really hard, and now it turns right on. Also, please make sure that the lock on the right side to keep this from going up and down is unlocked. The next student may not know that you had it locked in place and can't figure out why they can't lift or lower the saw. You may notice when you come up to the saw that this tape measure only goes up to 54 inches, and that's it. 54 seems to be the maximum that I can cut a length. Well, that's not the case. If I have a board that's, say, 80 inches, I can't, just slide this down to 80. So what I have to do is move the saw blade itself down a little bit. Now, as I may have mentioned before, there are some metal pins at the top, and there's multiple pins, so I can shift it from one pin to the next. It's exactly 40 inches from pin to pin. So if I need an 80-inch board, I'll move this down to the next pin by lifting up on that lever, pulling it down to the next pin, and then locking it back in place. But now what I have to do is whatever measurement I need, in this case 80, I need to subtract 40 inches. And then I'll set this to 40. 80 minus 40 is 40. Now that I can lock that on 40, I know from the stop to the blade is my 80 inches, and that works for any measurement. If I have 120 inches, I will move it down to the next pin and now remove 40 inches twice. 120 minus 80 will be, again, we're back to our 40, and then I can make the cut. So each pin is 40 inches from center to center, so you can get your long lengths.